We're looking at the 2025 Social Security Trustees Report, some crucial insights from the Brookings Institution, and various other reports on recent administrative changes.
Yeah.
So our mission today is basically to unpack the current financial state of Social Security, explore the major policy debates swirling around it, understand these recent administrative actions and their real-world impacts, and yeah, try to separate some fact from fiction.
Sounds good. So if you're curious about what's really going on with Social Security, what the future might hold, and maybe what some of the biggest discussions are in Washington right now, well, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this. So the headlines can be pretty stark, sometimes alarming. Can you start by just giving us the clearest picture? Where does Social Security stand financially right now based on these reports?
Absolutely. The 2025 Social Security Trustees Report, which just came out June 18th, 2025, it paints the challenging picture.
Okay.
The Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund, that's OASI, the one paying retirement and survivor benefits.
Right, the main one most people think of.
Exactly. It's projected to become insolvent in just 8 years. By 2033.
8 years.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really not far off at all. What does insolvent actually mean for someone relying on those benefits day to day?
Yeah, it's a stark term. It means under current law, if nothing changes, Congress does nothing.
Right.
Today's 59-year-olds hitting full retirement age and today's youngest retirees turning 70, they would face an automatic 23% benefit cut.
23%. Just like that.
Just like that. Imagine your monthly check suddenly shrinking by nearly a quarter. It's a significant automatic reduction baked into the current law. And if the OASI fund were to borrow from the Disability Insurance Fund, the SSDI fund,
Which covers disability benefits.
right, if they combine them, the combined trust funds would be depleted by 2034, still very soon. And that would lead to a slightly smaller, but still really impactful 19% benefit cut.
So still a huge cut.
Still huge. And what's particularly concerning, I think, is that this combined date, 2034, it's actually 1 year sooner than they predicted in last year's report.
So it's not just a hypothetical future problem. The timeline is actually kind of accelerating.
It seems that way, yes.
Is this just a short-term blip, or are there, deeper long-term imbalances driving this whole thing?
Oh, it's definitely a long-term challenge. And the reports, they really highlight these large and frankly growing cash deficits.
Okay.
Just look at the next decade. Social Security faces a $3.6 trillion shortfall.
3.6 trillion.
Trillion. And the annual cash deficits. They're projected to grow significantly. They're about 2.7% of taxable payroll today, rising to 3.6% by 2050, and then all the way up to 4.9% by 2099.
Okay, those percentages might be a bit abstract for some folks.
Yeah.
How does that translate over the long haul?
Well, over the standard 75-year projection window, the program faces what's called a 3.82% of taxable payroll actuarial deficit,
Right.
which translates into, get this, a massive $26 trillion shortfall on a present value basis.
Wow, $26 trillion. Honestly, when I hear numbers that big, my eyes just sort of glaze over. Can you help us wrap our heads around what present value basis means for a figure like that?
Yeah, it's hard to fathom. Think of present value as the amount of money you'd need right now, today, sitting in an account to cover all those projected future shortfalls, accounting for interest and inflation over time.
Got it. So it's the scale of the problem now.
Exactly. It gives you a sense of the immediate scale of the hole we need to fill if we wanted to fix it all today. And what's particularly striking, maybe alarming, is that this $26 trillion shortfall, it's the largest imbalance they've seen in almost 50 years, nearly double what it was just back in 2010.
Okay, that really does sound like the finances have actually gotten worse, and pretty recently. What's the single most impactful factor? Why has the outlook worsened recently? Is it just demographics, or was there a specific policy shift?
That's a really good question. The outlook has significantly worsened just in the last year. That 75-year solvency gap, it increased from 3.52% of payroll last year to 3.82% this year.
Good.
And nearly half of that deterioration, about 0.14% of that jump, is directly attributed to Congress passing the Social Security Fairness Act last year.
The Fairness Act. How did that add contribute to the shortfall? What exactly is this double dipping it allowed?
Right. So this Social Security Fairness Act, it allowed certain state and local government workers, folks who often have their own separate pension systems, and didn't pay into Social Security for that part of their career.
Okay.
It made it easier for them to also claim Social Security benefits, maybe from other work they did, without the usual reductions that prevent, well, what some call double dipping. So it increased benefit payouts more than expected.
I see. So more money going out.
Exactly. Other factors definitely play a role too. Lower actual and expected fertility rates, fewer future workers paying in, and a regulatory change that apparently made it a bit easier to qualify for disability benefits.
Okay.
Interestingly, the reports note that higher levels of illegal immigration have actually improved the balance slightly
How so?
because more people are working and paying payroll taxes, even if they might not be eligible for benefits later. It adds revenue in the short term.
Fascinating. So, okay, the overall message seems pretty clear. Time is running out,
Mm.
and some recent changes have actually made the problem more acute.
That's a fair summary. The severity of the challenge really highlights the immediate need for action, which, raises the really important question, what are the potential solutions being debated? What are the trade-offs policymakers are grappling with? And our sources really highlight some very stark choices here.
Yeah, one of the most fascinating points, I thought, digging through these sources, specifically from the Brookings Institution, is this direct comparison they make between extending certain tax cuts and, well, saving Social Security. What's the core $5 trillion question they're posing there?
Right. Brookings doesn't just present a dry trade-off. They really expose what they see as a fundamental choice about our national priorities. They point out that Republican lawmakers and former President Trump are pushing hard to make the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the TCJA provisions.
The ones expiring soon?
Exactly, the ones set to expire at the end of this year. They want to make those permanent. Brookings calculates that doing so would add over $5 trillion to deficits through 2035.
$5 trillion. Okay.
Now, here's the kicker. What's truly insightful in their analysis is that the amount of money it would take to extend those TCJA provisions permanently, that same amount of money could instead be used to keep Social Security solvent for at least the next 75 years, potentially even longer.
Whoa. So it's basically a direct either-or situation from this perspective. It really feels like we're being asked to choose between two very, very different futures there.
It's presented as a very clear trade-off, yes. And Brookings argues that choosing Social Security solvency over extending the TCJA would have several profound advantages.
Such as?
Well, first, obviously, it would avoid those automatic deep cuts to Social Security benefits we just talked about. Benefits that, remember, 42% of retirees depend on for at least half their income. It's a critical lifeline for millions.
Absolutely critical.
Second, they argue it would be progressive policy. The TCJA, analyses show, disproportionately benefits the top 1% of income earners. Shoring up Social Security helps broadly across the income spectrum, especially lower and middle income folks.
So it's a fairness argument, too.
Right. It's not just about fiscal solvency. It's about, our societal contract and who we prioritize. And third, they point out, unlike extending the TCJA, fixing Social Security wouldn't hurt economic growth. In fact, a Congressional Budget Office analysis suggests extending the TCJA would actually have a slightly negative effect on growth within just 4 years.
Interesting. Okay, so that's one major fork in the road highlighted by Brookings.
Yeah.
Beyond this specific, very stark trade-off, are there other prominent ideas out there for shoring up Social Security's finances that our sources touch upon?
Yes, absolutely. That Brookings analysis presents a really clear choice, but it's important to remember, like you said, it's just one piece of a complex puzzle.
Right.
Beyond that specific debate, our sources also explore other prominent ideas, things policymakers are definitely considering. One significant area of discussion, mentioned by Dr. Ed Weir, he's a former Social Security manager,
Okay.
is raising the cap on taxable income.
You mean the amount of someone's earnings that are actually subject to the Social Security tax each year?
Yeah. Exactly that. Currently, there's a limit, a cap, on how much of your earnings are subject to the Social Security FICA tax. For this year, it's $176,100 annually.
So if you earn more than that, say $300,000.
You only pay Social Security taxes on the first $176,100. Everything above that amount, not taxed for Social Security.
Right, which really changes the progressive nature of the tax at higher income levels, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And as income inequality has grown, with more income concentrated at the top, a larger and larger proportion of total national earnings actually escapes this tax entirely. Dr. Weir points out, interestingly, that Medicare doesn't have such a cap. The Medicare tax applies to all earnings.
That's true.
So he suggests if the cap on Social Security taxes were completely eliminated, making all earnings subject to the tax, that alone could potentially fund the program for decades. Maybe even allow for increased benefits for those really struggling, the ones barely surviving on their current Social Security check.
Wow, eliminating the cap could do that much.
Potentially, yes, according to his perspective. However, he does add a crucial caveat. He notes that every year we wait, the less that's going to help. Meaning the longer we delay, the less effective even that powerful tool becomes, and you'd likely need additional measures on top of it.
Right, the hole just gets bigger.
Yeah.
Okay, this is where I think it gets really interesting. Because beyond the huge financial projections and these big policy debates in D.C., our sources also reveal a lot about changes happening right now, like on the ground within the Social Security Administration itself, and the immediate impact these are having on people trying to use the system.
Yes.
We've seen reports from the White House, from the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, talking about former President Trump's plans. But then we also have these critical reports about the effects of recent actions coming from Brookings again, and a specific report out of Washington State. How do we reconcile these really different narratives?
Yeah, this is where critical thinking is absolutely essential for anyone following this. You have the White House stating that President Trump will always protect Social Security, Medicare, and insisting he will not cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid benefits.
Right. The focus is always on waste, fraud, and abuse.
Exactly. Claiming they can save $500 billion, maybe $700 billion a year just by eliminating that. However, other sources, as you said, present a significantly different picture of what recent administration actions actually mean and what their consequences are on the ground.
Okay, so let's look at one of those. There's a report titled, "Trump and Elon are breaking the Social Security Administration." What does that report suggest is happening?
Well, this report details some pretty significant administrative changes under the Trump administration, often linked to this Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE initiative. The stated goal is reducing the federal bureaucracy. But look at the specifics. Despite the fact that SSA's administrative expenses are already incredibly low, less than 1% of total benefits paid out, there's an initial target of eliminating 7,000 jobs just this year through buyouts, reassignments.
7,000 jobs. Out of how many?
Well, the SSA began the administration with about 57,000 employees, and that was already its lowest staffing level in 50 years. So these are deep cuts on top of existing lows.
And what have these cuts actually meant for people trying to call or get online or visit an office? Are these just theoretical impacts, or are people feeling it?
Oh, not theoretical at all. According to the report, these cuts have led to immediate tangible consequences, like the SSA's website crashed 4 times in just 10 days back in March 2025.
Wow.
Call wait times soared to over 5 hours in some cases, and employees often couldn't even make callbacks because the wait times stretched past the end of their workday.
5 hours. Imagine being elderly or disabled and waiting that long.
Exactly. The report describes it as making it incredibly difficult, sometimes practically impossible, for Americans to simply access the benefits they've earned. And it's not just phones and websites. The DOGE initiative is apparently considering closing physical field offices, too.
Closing offices.
Yes. They've identified federal buildings, including the Henry M. Jackson Federal Building in Seattle, which houses a busy SSA office, as potentially not core to government operations.
What would that mean for people?
It could force seniors, people with disabilities, especially those in rural areas who already travel far, to drive much, much further for essential in-person assistance. It creates a huge barrier for already vulnerable populations.
That's a massive hurdle for many, particularly those maybe less tech-savvy or without easy transportation. What about policies that directly affect people's monthly payments? Anything changing there?
Yes, and this is a big one. A particularly concerning change for beneficiaries highlighted in these reports is the reinstitution of a 50% clawback rate for Social Security overpayments.
Clawback, meaning if SSA thinks they paid someone too much.
Exactly. Sometimes errors happen, and SSA determines they've overpaid someone. The Biden administration had previously limited how much they could take back each month to 10% of the person's benefit check to avoid severe hardship.
Okay, 10% seems manageable.
Well, this new change allows SSA to take back up to 50% of a monthly check until the overpayment is fully recouped.
50%. Half their check.
Half their check, which, as you can imagine, can cause absolutely severe financial hardship. Reports cite instances where beneficiaries fear it could even lead to homelessness.
I can believe it. That's devastating.
And there were also new policies initially that required in-person identity verification, even for claims started over the phone. This created huge burdens, again, especially for seniors and rural residents. While that was partially rolled back for some situations, the initial difficulty and the remaining uncertainty caused considerable distress.
Okay, so these clearly aren't just minor bureaucratic tweaks. They have real consequences. How do these administrative changes, these service cuts and policy shifts align with the broader financial picture we talked about earlier? Does the Trump campaign's overall agenda, as analyzed by the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, factor into this financial outlook?
Yes, it's absolutely all interconnected, and
Mm.
this is where the narrative of just cutting waste and fraud really clashes with independent analysis. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, or CRF,